The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the shooting death of Judge Kevin Mullins, a man who was really well-liked and respected by the folks in Appalachia. In fact, the same could be said of the man accused of murdering him, Letcher County Sheriff Shawn "Mickey" Stines. Here's the story. Whitesburg, Kentucky is a small rural community of under 2,000 residents in eastern Kentucky, a beautiful place to live nestled in Appalachia. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, a place where many folks have both personal and professional connections. And that was the situation with the local sheriff, Shawn "Mickey" Stines, and the only judge in town, the Honorable Kevin Mullins, both with great reputations, known especially for their work in trying to help their community battle the opioid epidemic, which is taking so many lives and destroying so many families. On September 19th, the judge and the sheriff grabbed lunch and headed back to the judge's chambers. Once they got there, they went into the judge's office for a closed-door private meeting. What happened next, no one in this small town expected. Reports that the sheriff looked at the judge's phone and then fired his gun several times, taking the life of Judge Mullins. The sheriff then walked into the courtroom, laid down his gun, and surrendered himself. Sheriff Mickey Stines is now charged with first-degree murder, and the community is in collective mourning and absolute shock. This is so baffling. This story, this situation, like, how could this happen? I'm telling you, literally, no one in Letcher County who knew these two men ever imagined that something like this could happen. That the elected sheriff and the judge, you know, there's one sheriff in town, not a big town, right? He's got Letcher County, not a ton of people there. You've got the judge, people know the judge, they know the sheriff, people at the courthouse know both of them, like them, respect them, and they seem to like each other. Yet here we are. I want to play for you. This is from the day of the shooting. It's a quick recording, but it's the dispatch recording. And as you listen to it, listen to the intensity of this situation. This is a courthouse shooting. Let's listen.
316 needs to be out to Letcher County Courthouse. That shot's fired on the second floor.
And there's the courthouse. You can see it. And covering this story, investigating this story, it always comes back and really starts in one place. And it's the question that everyone has. Everyone in Letcher County and around the country. And it's my first question of this investigation. Why? Why would the sheriff shoot the judge? And I think about that question, and I know there's one person who absolutely knows the answer, and that's the sheriff. But we haven't heard from the sheriff. So joining me to help try to pick apart this issue, this extremely important issue, is forensic psychiatrist, trial expert, witness, and columnist, Dr. Carol Lieberman. Okay, I want to take this up one piece at a time, okay? One piece at a time. Let's first talk about, this is a man of the law, right? So at the moment he does this, right? That's what he's accused of doing. At the moment he does this, he has to realize all of the repercussions of this, right?
Yes.
Professionally, legally, freedom, his family, all of it.
So it has to be for some ultimate, something that is of ultimate importance for him to basically give his life away for it. I mean, it can't be some argument, some sort of trivial argument, or something that, I mean, it has to be very personal. It's not even something that's, I mean, you know, there's the question of this, the fact he had been deposed for a case. Sabrina Atkins was suing him and this other deputy for raping her and her friend, well, the other inmate. And, you know, so you could, one thing you would, of course, think of is, could it have something to do with, did something come up at the deposition that related to the judge? I mean, the interesting thing is that the rape was in the judge's courtroom. I mean, in the
chambers.
Office,
in the chambers.
In the chambers.
There's
the
another
same place.
Absolutely. Let me do this because I'm so glad you brought that up, Dr. Carol Lieberman. Joining us by phone is the attorney representing the woman suing Sheriff Stines. Ned Pillersdorf is with us. Ned, thanks so much for being here. Let's get to that issue. It's a few days, right? A few days before the shooting that the sheriff is deposed in your office. Is there anything that comes up? I know you can't talk specifics about it, but from your vantage point, was there anything that came up during that deposition that could have, and I don't want to say the word triggered, but it is triggering the sheriff to take such a drastic action 3 days later?
The deposition was on Monday. The shooting was on Thursday. The deposition was not a friendly affair. I thought Sheriff Stines was very subdued, very depressed, and very non-responsive. But the context of the deposition, I think, is important. This was not taking the sheriff's deputy because one of his bailiffs had been in a car accident. This was a deposition where we made very sweeping allegations that the sheriff's bailiff had basically been coercing women, vulnerable women, people on ankle bracelets or in drug court, to have sex, and all of the sexual incidents occurred in the judge's chambers. How do we know that? Well, the bailiff, he actually pled guilty to doing exactly that. So I would say the subject matter of the deposition was intense. Did it have anything to do with the unbelievable events 3 days later? I don't know. I do know, you know, typically when you take the deposition of a Kentucky sheriff, they're gregarious, they're talkative, they're combative. I would describe Stines as being subdued, depressed. It was a tense deposition. He often hesitated a long time before answering questions, somewhat similar to the video you showed the other night of his arraignment, when he was asked questions and there were these long silences. And I think at one point he didn't even respond to the judge's question, which is unusual. You know, sheriff is used to court proceedings.
Absolutely. That's an interesting observation. I want to play something else here. This is Mike Watts, the Letcher County Circuit Court Clerk, who spoke with Ashley Banfield on News Nation about what happened when the sheriff was in chambers with the judge just prior to the shooting.
From my understanding, Judge Mullins handed the sheriff his phone. The sheriff looked at both phones. He had two phones in each, one phone in each hand. He reviewed the phones. He laid the judge's phone back down and then stood up.
Did those staffers who were in the outside room, outside of chambers, did they report hearing anything prior to the shots?
No argument, no.
And what about just conversation? Was there a normal conversation in normal tones prior to the shots?
They couldn't hear. The sheriff walked in and asked whoever was in the chambers that he needed to speak with the judge in private, and the doors were closed.
Okay, Dr. Carol Lieberman, let me ask you about this. This is very specific. No one heard yelling, right? You might not hear the conversation with the door closed, but if there's like screaming, you might hear it. He sees something on the judge's phone. The judge voluntarily gives him his phone. He looks at that phone, and he's got a second phone in the other hand. Something on that phone seems to be what put the sheriff over the top in that moment.
You know, this is a little bit like a game of telephone, because all we have to go on is, there's sort of innuendos, there are rumors. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on social media. And for example, I heard that they exchanged phones. But here's what I think, again, basing it on sort of a conglomerate of what people, rumor mill, basically. But in any case, supposedly at the lunch that they had together, the sheriff got a phone call, or it could have been a text, so, which would explain what he was showing him on his phone, perhaps. And it got him very upset. And he took his meal to go. It's not like, it's not like they were sitting and chatting in a friendly kind of way for a long time over lunch. So he got his, again, basing it on putting stories together. So he got up, he took his food, and he left. And then, so then he came into the sheriff's the judge's chambers, and but there are stories about how it might have to do with that he had the impression, and perhaps that had to do with a text that he got, and then he saw something on the judge's phone that confirmed it in some way, that it had to do with his the judge sexually assaulting or abusing or having a relationship with the sheriff's daughter. Now, that would be something that could, inflame him between the lunch text and being in the chamber.
At the same time, and these rumors have been flying around, at the same time, there is a member of the family who is saying that rumor is not true, and of Sheriff Stines' family. So, but it's got to be connected to that text message. Ned, let me ask you, Ned, could you foresee anything that would be on the judge's phone connected to the civil lawsuit?
It's hard to say. I mean, the civil lawsuit covered a lot of ground. It basically alleged, I think NBC News quoted me, is Ben Fields, the bailiff, who had sex with at least one woman in the judge's chambers, and I think at least two others. They turned that courthouse kind of into a brothel for several years. And there's been speculation in the local newspaper that perhaps the reason why they suddenly added cameras to the judge's chambers was over the lawsuit I filed.
Wow.
I filed the lawsuit January of 22. Thereafter, we told the Attorney General's office, hey, we have these sexual text messages from the gentleman controlling the ankle bracelet that my client was on that left no doubt that they were having a sexual relationship. And 7 months later, the ankle bracelet, the deputy sheriff, Ben Fields, was indicted, and he pled guilty this past January. So there's been speculation in the local newspaper that perhaps the cameras were added after the lawsuit was filed.
That would make sense. Ned Pilgersdorf, stay with us. Dr. Carol Lieberman, stay with us. Coming up next, big question. Is anyone supporting the sheriff?
Two men's lives were changed forever. Their families' lives were changed forever.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
We have always got along. I always thought he was hilarious. I always thought he was very witty. He was fun to be around outside of court. And as a brother-in-law, I will never forget how kind he was to my children. It seemed that he had maybe endless patience for kids.
I was shocked. I was shocked and hurt at the same time, man. I hate to see where Kevin go because he helps a lot of people out. Sure did, yeah.
I would compare it to how I felt when the planes hit the towers in New York. That was that shocked. He wanted to help people, and he spent most of his career doing that. especially in the drug rehab program.
The shooting death of Judge Kevin Mullins out in Letcher County has touched the entire community, and the outpouring of love and kind words has been nonstop since this shooting. Now, Sheriff Mickey Stines was also elected by those people. But now things have changed, right? A man who was elected to enforce the law is now on the other side, accused of murder, which brings me to my next question. Is anyone supporting the sheriff? Are people rallying behind the sheriff? What exactly is going on? Still with me, the attorney representing the woman suing Sheriff Stines, Ned Pillersdorf, and forensic psychiatrist Dr. Carol Lieberman. Ned, let me ask you first, the filing of the lawsuit, all of this, obviously a huge story when that was began a couple of years ago. How did the community react under those circumstances relative to the sheriff?
I don't think there was much interest in the sheriff. It was more focused on Ben Fields, the individual who ran the ankle bracelet program. But, you know, the fact that we put in the lawsuit that the sexual encounters occurred in the judge's office did cause some attention being given. I felt when I went to that courthouse, I felt a certain coolness. I don't think people appreciated the lawsuit. I sued a popular sheriff. But on the other hand, I think things changed after Ben Fields was indicted and the eventual guilty plea. And when the guilty plea occurred, the Mountain Eagle, the local newspaper, which, by the way, is an excellent newspaper for a small town, had a long interview with one of the ladies, and she told a pretty compelling story. You know, how that impacted Sheriff Stines. It's a small sheriff's department, and the allegations we made were pretty sweeping. And in fairness to the defendants, they have denied the allegations, with the except for the fact that Fields did plead guilty to felony sex charges.
I want to put this up on the screen because there's actually a GoFundMe to support the Stines family. And this is part of the statement that's on that GoFundMe page. My name is Ginger Isaac. I am Caroline's sister-in-law, and that would be the sheriff's wife. Please consider donating to assist the family of Sheriff Mickey Stines to help with the expenses they will encounter during this tragic time. Also added in all of this was the rumor about their daughter being sexually abused is false. We don't want anyone donating under false pretenses. They've raised money. I don't know what the number said on the screen right there. The current, I looked at it earlier, and it was north of $8,000 so far. Dr. Carol Lieberman, your thoughts here about the support for a man who's accused of a horrific, horrific crime?
I think there were a lot of people who, or are a lot of people who really appreciated him. I mean, he worked as the sheriff for quite a while, and he helped people. I mean, there was one woman talking about how whenever he saw her, he would give her a hug and ask her if there was anything he could do for her. I mean, it seems like there were positive feelings towards him from a lot of people who were asked. So, you know, when you think about it's a couple of other things that are interesting is the idea that when he came to the deposition, he was sort of non-responsive and depressed. Now, of course, nobody likes to be sued, but depositions can be very harsh and challenging. But still, and put that together with the fact that he supposedly hasn't talked to his family since he got arrested. So there's still water is run deep. I mean, I think there's something more there, you know, that he's either ashamed of or that he's feels bad about. I mean, it's just strange the fact, if it was having to do with his daughter, I don't know that he wouldn't talk to his family. I think he would want to talk to his family and explain that that's why he did it. So Also, what would be on the judge's phone would be some kind of possibly, some potential thing that would have triggered him, would be some kind of communication either with the daughter or with somebody about the daughter. Again, if the daughter has anything to do with it. But I don't think it would be something more impersonal like the court case, as much as he probably was very depressed and upset about that.
Yeah, and I think once information comes out about the why of it, I think that will certainly impact the level of support or non-support for the sheriff. And I think that has that'll play a big role in all of this, Dr. Carol Lieberman. We have about 30 seconds here.
Well, I think the sooner that this information comes out, the better, because rather than everybody, in that small town having a rumor fest, I don't think that helps anybody. I think that it's of course it's tragic, and it's what people are going to want to think about, or once they do find out what the deal was, they're going to want to think, was this something that would make somebody have a what do you call it when it's an emergency, an emotional reason why what am I trying to think of when it's an emotional reason? I think
the word is written in the statute, like an extreme emotional disturbance, and that's in the statute itself. Dr. Carol Lieberman, we are out of time for now.
Instead of murder.
Yeah, exactly.
Manslaughter.
We're out of time for now. Thank you so much. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the shooting death of Judge Kevin Mullins. It's a crime that a lot of folks in Eastern Kentucky are having a difficult time understanding because the accused killer is the local sheriff, Mickey Stines. Here's the story.
Appalachia is the part of Eastern Kentucky where the towns are small and folks look out for each other. There's a lot of respect for law enforcement and the justice system. And folks who work in that system get to know each other very well. Such was the case for the local sheriff, Mickey Stines, and his friend, District Judge Kevin Mullins. But like any place, sometimes there is controversy. In Letcher County, it was a deputy who got caught sexually assaulting female inmates in the judge's chambers. That was a couple of years ago, but now everyone is taking another look at that case because something else happened in the judge's chambers. The judge was shot and killed, and the local sheriff is the one being charged. What's going on in this small Kentucky town?
And the shooting happened in the small Kentucky town in the judge's chambers, but something else happened in the judge's chambers. And it may or may not be connected to all of this. And it involved one of the sheriff's deputies who he pleaded guilty to it, was sexually assaulting inmates, female inmates, in the judge's chambers after hours. Bizarre behavior, very criminal behavior. And that's happening in the same chambers where there's a shooting death of the judge. I want to explain a little bit about this civil lawsuit. So there was a criminal case involving that deputy, Ben Fields, but now there's a civil lawsuit as well. And in the civil lawsuit, the allegations against Ben Fields, who's a former deputy. Defendant Fields, a deputy sheriff with the Letcher County Sheriff's Department, was assigned to be the plaintiff's home incarceration officer. Plaintiff notified defendant Fields that she did not have the money to pay for her ankle bracelet, but she was terrified to return to the Letcher County Jail. Defendant Fields made flirtatious comments about the plaintiff's looks and body and told her that he was confident they could, quote, work something out. Defendant Fields took the plaintiff into District Judge Mullins' chambers, telling plaintiff that he wanted to meet her there because there were no cameras. At this time, Defendant Fields took off the plaintiff's ankle monitor and told her that she would not have to pay the associated fees any longer, but could remain out on home incarceration. Between late June and December of 2021, Defendant Fields met plaintiff at the Letcher County Courthouse in the evening or early morning hours approximately 6 times. During these meetings, Defendant Fields' behavior escalated from flirtatious comments to forcible kissing to oral sex to intercourse with the plaintiff, all of which occurred at the Letcher County Courthouse after hours in Judge Mullins' chambers. So, the criminal case happened, it's resolved. He was fired by the sheriff, this deputy. But now there's the civil suit, and it's ongoing. And the sheriff had been deposed in this civil suit. So that brings me to my next question. What is the sheriff's connection to the civil lawsuit? Why is the sheriff being sued here? Right? The deputy is the one alleged to have coerced the victim in that sex assault, those 6 times. But how about the sheriff? Joining me to help work through all this, Deputy Public Defender for LA County, Philip Dubé, and joining us by phone, forensic expert and the former chief deputy of the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office. You remember him from the Alec Murdaugh trial, Dr. Kenneth Kinsey. Thank you both for being here. Okay, let me start with you, Philip. Your initial thoughts about the civil suit involving the sheriff.
Yeah, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if plaintiff's counsel, what was his name? Ned.
Ned Pillersdorf.
Mr. Pillersdorf filed a civil rights lawsuit, I believe, in federal court. I don't know if it was in Letcher County where this occurred or in a neighboring county, wherever their U.S. Central District is. But in any event, I believe he is alleging that the entire sheriff's department under Mickey Stein's supervision acted under color of law by failing to intervene, knowing good and well that these sexual exploits were going on in the courthouse, let alone in a judge's chambers. And if he turned a blind eye to what was going on, failed to intervene to prevent this, then it could be actionable under a Section 1983 civil rights type theory. Additionally, it could be criminally actionable. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised at all, Vinnie, if the U.S. attorneys are involved with the DOJ investing criminal civil rights abuses. And it could be that maybe Stines knew that he was under a federal probe, under a federal investigation. And this is rank speculation, but maybe went to see the judge to see if anybody had tried to interview him, get a statement, sent him any type of communication for further intel on what, if anything, the judge may have known. And it's very possible that maybe the judge was talking to law enforcement and word got back to Stines, and then before you know it, we have a homicide in chambers. But again, that's separate and apart from any civil liability that is pending.
Now, I want to put up on the screen, this is from the civil lawsuit. Upon information and belief, the Letcher County Sheriff, that's Mickey Stines, and unknown supervisors of Defendant Fields, that's a deputy who was actually doing it, failed to adequately train and supervise Defendant Fields. You've got to train someone not to coerce an inmate into engaging in that conduct. Upon information and belief, the Letcher County Sheriff knew or should have known that the Defendant Fields was sexually abusing females, including the plaintiff in his charge. Females, there's more than one accuser in all of this. So that's significant. Knew or should have known about it. He's working for him. It's a small department. Upon information and belief, the Letcher County Sheriff did not reasonably respond to reports or suspicions of sexual abuse perpetrated by Defendant Fields. So if you hear those rumors that you may be hearing now about this case, Dr. Kenny Kinsey, I want to bring you in to take us inside a sheriff's department, right? You've got the sheriff. How you doing? The sheriff's the elected head of the department. This is a relatively small department in eastern Kentucky, in the Appalachia area. is it hard to believe that the sheriff wouldn't have known or heard anything about this? What are your thoughts there about the allegations and what the deputy pleaded guilty to and what the sheriff would likely know or not know?
Vinnie, thank you for having me. And your other guest is absolutely right, and your synopsis is accurate as well. There are two things that sheriff's offices are generally sued for: failure to train, failure to supervise. And that vicarious liability, you know, the sheriff is an awesome responsibility. A man or woman who is elected sheriff, they are considered the highest law enforcement in their respective county. And most of our states certainly go by that. There's a few states where sheriffs are appointed, but there's over 3,000 honorable men and women who wear a sheriff's badge. But it's so much authority and so much of an awesome responsibility. Sometimes they go left of center. And when they're in there so long and you're given that authority for so long and you have such a large following, everyone wants to be friends of the sheriff. And those are from, you know, the bottom to the top of the spectrum. And most of those, I call them hanger-ons, and I've worked for 4 sheriffs, so I'm very familiar with this. Many of them have great intentions. They just want to support local law enforcement. Many of them have nefarious reasons for supporting the highest law enforcement in the county. And when you get those two lines blurred, you know, that's where your ethics and integrity comes in there. And, you know, the sheriff is a good target because he is ultimately responsible. He holds the bond, or his department holds the bond on every sworn officer that works under his umbrella. And in most states, you work at the will and pleasure of the sheriff. So that's an awesome amount of responsibility for one man or woman to hold. And, you know, sometimes when you're there too long, you think you're untouchable. I'm not saying that's the case here, but you think you're untouchable. And it you know, it's many a slip towards cupping a lip. And it doesn't start as what we're seeing here in these chambers. It doesn't start in the former litigation. It starts small and then it grows. And when they come in and do these investigations, generally, you know, it's scary what they uncover. Some small violations, but many times it leads to something much larger.
Are you shocked that they're using the judges' chambers, that Ben Fields was using the judges' chambers early in the morning or after hours?
Wow, Vinnie, it's two things I've never done: courthouse security, except on special occasions, and dispatching. But every time I've been in a judge's chambers, you know, I've had some pleasant experiences, but I want to get out of there as quick as possible. I don't know that would be the perfect spot for me or in my situation here in our state, but I'm not shocked because, like I said, this isn't the first time this officer did this. And it builds, and of course, you know, you don't steal the whole cookie jar. You take one cookie and then 2 cookies, and then eventually a child will, you know, work his way up. And I think they're going to uncover some other things in that case and what we're talking about this evening.
Philip Dubé, do you think there's any way that these two things are not connected? The shooting of the judge in the chambers and what Deputy Fields was doing in the chambers and the lawsuit and the deposition and everything else that is sort of circulating in this very small community?
I just think everything is so interwoven that and interlaced, if you will, that it's all somehow connected. I have no doubt. I just can't imagine that over civil litigation that someone would go and kill a judge. It's very common for law enforcement, sheriff's officials, police officials to get sued. And they're typically defended by the municipality. And I believe in Letcher County, they have a Letcher County attorney that does just that. They provide civil defense for their elected and appointed officials should there be any litigation while in office. And that's what they do. Listen, you can't ever stop people from suing. And a lot of times the claims have no merit, they're groundless, and sometimes people are just looking for a quick payday, and obviously there are other cases that are quite meritorious. And that's what discovery and litigation is all about, to get to the truth, get to all the facts. But my spidey sense says that the DOJ is involved in this one, and he might be running scared, because the last thing that Sheriff Stines needs is for his entire department to be hurled into a receivership and be taken over by the feds until they can restore law and order.
Yeah, it's so complicated trying to get inside the mind of Mickey Stines when he allegedly shot the judge. Okay, still to come. What does it take to remove a sheriff from his job?
Sir, it's my understanding that he's in the process of losing his job as a sheriff of Letcher County, obviously.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
Sir, it's my understanding that he's in the process of losing his job as a sheriff of Letcher County, obviously, and will not have income going forward.
So Sheriff Mickey Stines is still sheriff. He made his appearance as still being the sheriff of Letcher County. That's why when they incarcerated him, they sent him to a different county so he wasn't in charge of himself behind bars. Slight conflict of interest there. So something else has happened, because obviously this is huge news everywhere, and it's kind of a awkward situation when you have the sheriff of the county accused of murder and murdering the judge from the county, and he's still in office. So take a look here. There was a letter from the governor, Andy Bashir, who wrote, Sheriff Stines, we ask that you tender your resignation as the Letcher County Sheriff to the Letcher County Judge Executive by the end of Friday, September 27, 2024. If you do not tender your resignation, the governor will move forward with removal under KRS 63-100. Sincerely, S. Travis Mayo, General Counsel for the governor. Brings me to my next question, which is, again, what does it take? What does it take, folks, to remove a sheriff from his job? I mean, he surrendered himself after allegedly shooting the judge, like turned himself in, but still is the sheriff. He did place his gun allegedly down on counsel table in the courtroom. Wow. With me, Deputy Public Defender for LA County, Philip Dubé. Joining us by phone, forensic expert, former Chief Deputy of the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office. You know him from the Murdoch trial, Dr. Kenneth Kinsey. Dr. Kinsey, I want to begin with you on the notion of a sheriff stepping down. How reluctant are sheriffs to step down, resign, and give up their office and their position?
Vinny, I've seen it work both ways. I've seen a sheriff removed by the governor and went on to end up doing prison time, of course, after the trial. And I've seen a sheriff put on leave by governor, all of his power being taken away, and then it make its way through the court, and he was exonerated and went right back into office. But regardless, you know, you can be fired by your constituents every 4 years or every 6 years, respectively, depending on where you live. But you know, that is a big that's a big mud puddle to tread. Once something happens, whether you're exonerated or not, it's going to be real hard when you go to run for office at the end of your term. So it's kind of a death sentence a lot of times, depending on the severity of the case. But many times if you see a sheriff voluntarily resign, it's because he or she knows the cards are stacked against them, because generally speaking, they're going to fight it till the last minute. And, you know, hopefully they can, you know, get a jury in their favor, and of course they can go back into office. And I have seen it both ways. Just recently here in our state, a sheriff was suspended by the governor, and it worked out in his favor in court, and he went right back into office.
I want to put that Kentucky statute up, the 63-100. It's removal of peace officers for neglect, charges, and notice. A peace officer guilty of neglect of duty shall be removed from office in the manner prescribed below. The governor shall sign written charges, set forth the grounds for removal of the officer. The charges, when considered collectively, must be supported by the affidavit of at least 2 witnesses. but it shall not be necessary to support each separate count or individual charge embraced in the charges by 2 affidavits. The affidavits must be filed by the governor as part of the record in the proceedings. The charges need not possess the formalities and exactness of an indictment. The charges shall be recorded in the Executive Journal, and an attested copy shall be made by the Secretary of State. No response shall be filed to the charges, but they shall stand traverse of record. Notice must be given to the officer sought to be removed, stating a time and place of the hearing, giving him at least 20 days to prepare his defense. Okay, let me ask you, Philip Dubé, if he doesn't voluntarily step down and the governor has to go forward, how do you see that playing out?
It operates similar to the articles of impeachment process that we see in the federal government. So essentially what he would do is prepare sort of removal grounds, typically rooted in misconduct or neglect of office, and then the charges are brought for public hearing to the Legislative Council. And they hold a full public hearing, and they take evidence, they take testimony, and then they vote.
Let me ask you this, though. Let me ask you this. If you've got murder charges pending against you, do you have a right to, like, have it delayed because you don't want to incriminate yourself? Like, usually, like, when there's a civil litigation and there's a criminal case, all the civil stuff just sits and waits until the criminal case. But here, they're so intertwined.
Well, the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination attaches also at administrative hearings such as this, or legislative hearings. They're not limited to judicial proceedings. So if he is subpoenaed to testify at his own sort of impeachment trial, if you will, and he takes the Fifth, he can certainly do that. And they're going to have to prove the misconduct or the removal grounds with other evidence. And I'm sure they have it. You know, all they have to do, and by the way, the rules of evidence are much more relaxed at these types of hearings because the evidence code does not apply. It's basically an administrative proceeding. So a lot of hearsay is allowed in, evidence that doesn't really have the true foundation or authentication that we would have to set forth in a judicial proceeding is not required. So they would absolutely be able to prove it up. But let's go with that question you had about, let's assume he does get indicted. You know, you cannot use the criminal justice process as a tool to remove elected officials. He would have to be convicted and sent to prison because obviously he cannot serve the people from behind bars.
Philip Dubé, great to see you. Thank you so much. Dr. Kenny Kinsey, appreciate your insight. Thank you. This investigation is really about one thing. What would drive a family man, an elected man of the law, to, in a moment's time, allegedly commit an act that would take him away from his family, away from his job, and put him behind bars with some of the people he's arrested through the years? Uncovering that will be the key to trying to understand what happened and will be the key for the jury to figure out what to do with all of this. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for those answers as the investigation continues. There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.